Alright, so I just saw Avatar Fire and Ash, the third installment in this franchise. I'm a huge fan of this franchise. The second one, Way of Water, is one of the greatest movie experiences I've ever seen. I saw it 3 times in the theaters, so Fire and Ash was obviously a huge anticipation for me throughout this whole year, even though we got a trailer sort of a little later than usual for a movie this big. But I'm all in on this franchise. I really enjoy these movies. I'm invested in them, in the characters, in the Solis, in this planet of Pandora, which just looks better than ever in this movie. We kind of go to... There's different areas that we kind of see in this movie. That is one thing, though. This film is also very familiar in lots of ways, but Pandora is still gorgeous. The cinematography, the CGI, the spectacle of this film is just off the charts. It's undeniable, but that's expected. James Cameron has been making these movies for decades now, trying to make them for even longer, and he just takes his time with them. He knows exactly what he's doing. He's got a lot of money to spend on these effects that look spectacular, and this movie delivers on that in every way possible. And like I said, that is expected, so that's kind of like the bare minimum kind of for these movies now, which sounds weird, but you expect that to be the case. You expect it to look gorgeous, to be immersed in this world, and have it feel almost like you're watching a nature documentary on Pandora, and that this is real, and that all these people, these tribes, are actually real, because that is what it feels like. So do I think this movie is as good as The Way of Water? No. It's very similar. It's kind of going through the same beats. Kind of feels like been there, done that in a lot of aspects. The Way of Water was just fantastic. It was absolutely incredible. And this movie didn't quite live up to that. It didn't quite meet those high bars that the previous movie set, as it kind of just tries to copy and paste in some sort of way. But still, this is an enjoyable movie. It's fun, it's entertaining, it's good. It's a solid film, but it's not... I want to say I wanted to love this movie. Like, I really want to love it, but I don't know if I quite do yet. I did see the last one 3 times in theaters, so I will see this one again, not in 3D. Kind of see it in a different way, but yeah, I really liked it though still. I think this is absolutely a solid action movie. Still invested in the characters. The Solis are still extremely likable. You root for them. So in this movie, we start off pretty much right after the events of Way of Water. The Solis are kind of reeling with the death of Netaim, one of their very close family members, a brother, the son of Jake Sully. And they're kind of dealing with that, the aftermath of that huge epic fight scene in the 3rd act of the last movie on that ship. They're kind of salvaging that ship which sunk in the ocean, and they're collecting guns, weapons, anything they can salvage to keep as a resource. And they are still living with the Water Tribe, but they decide that Spider should go back and live with his own people, that he can't be wearing this oxygen mask 24/7. Something's gonna happen, endanger him. So they decide to take him back, and on this journey, a lot of them go with them. There's this very cool scene. It's beautiful. It's almost like a hot air balloon, but like made of some sort of alien fabric or something on Pandora that's indigenous to that planet, but it looks amazing. It's colorful. It's just eye-popping. And most of this tribe and the Solis decide to go on this journey, on this trek with him to say goodbye. And this is when we get introduced to the Ash tribe. And this new tribe is led by the introduction of our newest villain, Varane, played by Una Chaplin. She is a psychopath. I really thought she was amazing as a villain. Her and her whole tribe are just a bunch of psychopaths, a bunch of freaks. They're dangerous, they're scary, they're ruthless, and they kind of don't feel like they belong in this franchise because they do some pretty questionable things. And with what James Cameron has been trying to do, taking us to all these different parts, all these different tribes of Pandora. This one's, fire and ash. The last one was water. This one is a great addition with an absolutely phenomenal villain who is scary, terrifying, but she is sidelined towards the end, mainly the 3rd act, when Stephen Lang's character, Colonel Quaritch, is basically just taking the role as the main villain once again. And I wasn't a fan of that. I really liked the introduction of Varane, of her tribe, and I really wish that she kind of had more of an impact, more of a role in this last part of the movie, because it really does feel like she disappears and it just kind of turns into a less epic action climax than the last movie. It wasn't nearly as intense. It wasn't nearly as long or, like I said, epic, but it is still very similar, and that was a lot of the last half of this movie. The characters, mainly the Solis, are also kind of going through the same exact thing. The kids specifically are really going through the same struggles. Lowak is still trying to prove himself as a soldier, as a warrior, and he really just wants to help his dad fight for this planet, fight for his tribe. But his dad, Jake, really still doesn't trust him or believe in him, kind of thinks of him as a kid still, and he has to prove himself. And that's basically exactly what his whole arc story was in the last movie. And at the end, after the huge battle, Jake touches him on the head when they're in the water and he says, "I see you." And he kind of does this same thing in this movie at the end and saying that, "I believe in you, I need you to have my back." But the familiarity wasn't necessarily a deal breaker. It just didn't evoke that same feeling that I had in The Way of Water. But I still care about these characters. But it is still a little frustrating in the fact that we're just getting basically the same movie kind of over again, even though the spectacle, the CGI, the effects, all of that is top notch. I just wish, you kind of wish that there was just something a little bit different, even though the fire tribe being introduced was awesome. Varain is incredible. But in the first half of this movie, I was kind of surprised. I was like, this isn't too familiar to the first one. You know, they're introducing new things, new lore with Kiri and, you know, what she's able to do. Also with Spider, who has a bigger role than I thought in this film. There's new stuff that happens with him that expands the lore of this planet, Pandora, and its capabilities, what's possible with humans being able to live on this planet. So all of that was cool. I enjoyed seeing all of that, but it doesn't really go anywhere. Just the second half of the movie starts, and then it just starts to do the same beats over and over that the last movie had. But at first I was like, okay, this is different. I'm kind of enjoying this. I still enjoyed it all, but the first half was trying to expand it just a little bit more. But I will tell you, I am not the biggest fan of Spider. I don't think he's that good of a character, if I'm being honest. He did kind of annoy me in the last movie. That was probably one of my biggest complaints with The Way of Water, and I don't know if it's James Cameron's writing, if it's the dialogue, if it's the way he's directing, because everyone else is fantastic. But it just must be the actor and the way he delivers his lines. Although I think the dialogue for his character sometimes can be a little weird, a little wonky. Just the shit that he says, it just doesn't feel authentic. Like, it just feels forced humor for no reason, and it kind of bothered me. Or maybe it's because he's a white boy with dreads who looks like he sleeps on the beach every night of his life. I don't know. I just don't really like that character. And in my opinion, I really just don't think he's a good actor, which kind of sucks because when you have people like Zoe Saldana in here, once again as Neytiri, just killing it, it's noticeable. But with that, Neytiri is obviously back in this film, but she is kind of sidelined a little bit as well. She kind of has just one beat in this movie, one sort of emotion, and that's anger. She doesn't do much either. She kind of gets taken out in the first battle, in the first half of this movie. She gets injured, goes back to the tribe, but she isn't as badass in this film. I think she was kind of left out from the action, from the last scene specifically. She was still there, she was still active, but she wasn't as prevalent as she was in the last movie, and she was one of the best parts. But just the Solis as a whole are awesome. Jake in this movie, once again, kind of does the same stuff again too. He doesn't really change that much. He's just trying to save his family, fight for the planet, which is awesome. Sam Worthington is great as Jake. But with Jake and his family, specifically with Lowak, after the events of the last movie where they're still kind of dealing with the death of that family member, of his son. And it just feels like Jake blames Lowak for the death of Neteyam, even though I don't think that's true. He's just kind of dealing with that in his head. And Lowak is also dealing with the guilt. He does feel like it was his fault that Neteyam died, even though it really wasn't. He knows it deep down, but you kind of put that burden on yourself. And Lowak and Jake are kind of going through that for a lot of this movie, just having that in the back of their minds, and it kind of comes out in different ways. But the whole family is really dealing with this in their own way. It's just Jake and Lowak are kind of the more central focus, considering that Lowak does feel like it was his fault. But Jake is still badass. He's very stern in his beliefs, protecting his family, doing whatever he can to do that. But you know, he was an ex-Marine, so he's just knows exactly what he's doing. The combat, the fighting, the action, it's all there. It's wonderful to see on screen. We also have the whales coming back in this, the Tolkien species, which is I love these dudes. I love these whales, these species. They're so awesome. They're so nice and endearing, and they're so lovable. I mean, they're just like a dolphin or something. You just automatically care about them. They're just cool. And much like the last movie, there's a lot of fucked up things that happens to these species. They're being hunted by the humans still, which is another familiar beat from the last movie that just kind of feels, I don't know, just repetitive. All these dudes who are hunting these whales should have died in the last movie. I know that main guy who's leading the charge got his arm bitten off. He's in this again. He's annoying as hell. I don't like that dude. And what happens to these whales in this movie is terrible, much like the last one. But James Cameron is also, you know, it's also social commentary in some sort of way, and the way that we treat our oceans and all that kind of stuff, the way we treat our planet. So he already kind of said that in the last movie, and it's just being repeated in this. So it does suck, but it still doesn't have that same effect from first seeing that Tolkien die, getting shot, taken down. The humans go inside, they eject that whatever it is that's supposed to cure cancer. It's awful, but it just doesn't have that same effect in this movie. But these species do finally do something that makes you root for them even more, and that scene was pretty cool. And besides the humans who are hunting the whales, all the humans on like the main ship are still trying to take over the planet. It feels like after 3 movies now, they've kind of gained no ground whatsoever. And it just feels like they're stuck in the same place they were at the end of the first movie. Now, Kiri is one of my favorite characters from the last one, from this movie. She is awesome. She is played by Sigourney Weaver, and from the last one, there is kind of something different about her, right? There's something special, and they really do explain that in a sort of way. They kind of expand on that lore, kind of what's going on with her, where she came from. And I really just enjoy seeing this character. She's strong, she's courageous, and overall just an over-the-top, extremely likable character that is one of my favorites. But with all that about the story, how it's familiar, it's kind of repetitive in some sort of way, hitting the same beats, been there, done that, this movie is still extremely entertaining. The action is kind of, I don't think it's as action-packed as the second movie, but when the action is there, we get some really awesome scenes, some really awesome set pieces, and it's just so crazy to just think about the spectacle of this film and just how James Cameron is able to achieve these movies. I saw it in IMAX 3D, and I think that's really the only way to see it. Most of the time, it really does feel like you're watching a National Geographic special on this planet Pandora. I mean, it's incredible what he's able to achieve, the time that he takes with all these visuals, the details, the colors. It's just a feat in itself, and it is truly remarkable. And if you go to these movies after seeing the first 2, or just in general, if you go to them, you know, kind of wanting more of a story, I understand that. But James Cameron knows the majority of the people, or the main reason why you go see this movie, is because of the spectacle, of the visual effects, of this planet Pandora that feels so real and tangible. He knows that, and he's going to deliver on that no matter what, no matter if the story is basically the same, copy and paste. It is frustrating, but man, the visual treat that he gives you is second to none. There is nothing like these movies. I think Dune may be the closest to this, but that's just a completely different tone. But of course, it is James Cameron, Terminator. He directed Aliens. I mean, this dude's always just creating worlds, taking us to other places for over 40 years now, and it's what he does best. I think he did say that he's going to direct 4 and 5. We'll see. He has basically spent this whole century so far on these movies, and it really pays off. I mean, there's these scenes, the cinematography too, just of the planet, of the sunsets. There's this scene too of this solar eclipse that happens pretty often on this planet. It's just beautiful, and the way they intertwine certain practical effects as well, like with the water. These water scenes still look incredible. I think when they go under the water, most of it is visual effects, but when they're on the surface, you know, treading water or swimming, or just the rivers, whatever's around them, the water is real. You can tell that, and they are seamlessly intertwined with these visual effects, with these CGI characters, with these motion captured characters, and that's when it looks the best in my opinion, because with how good that looks, there are scenes that are, obviously a lot of scenes that are just completely CGI, and the frame rate that he has this at, 60 frames per second, I believe is what it is. Sometimes you're like, okay, that's obviously completely fake. That's all CGI. Mainly with the animals, the ones that are flying, when they flap their wings, it kind of just feels a little video game-ish in some sort of way. I mean, it's still the best video game graphics that you can get out there, but sometimes you are kind of noticing that it does look like a next gen video game because of how awesome it looked still, but that does take you out of it in some sort of way, I think, just because you're able to notice it, but that's only because of how good and amazing these other scenes look. So there is just a little bit of contrast in that, but fuck it. I mean, this movie still is absolutely gorgeous. And I believe when Way of Water came out, there was a few different ways to see this movie. 3D with a high frame rate, 3D regular, high frame rate, no 3D, and then just regular all around, just 24 frames per second, 2D. I don't think that's an option in this. I think he made just the whole film 60 frames per second, and that does add to the clarity, add to the realism of a lot of these scenes. But it does stand out when you're used to seeing 24 frames per second, right? And every other film made pretty much is 24 frames per second. So in some scenes, it really does help this CGI, these visual effects, be the best they can. But in other scenes, it does kind of stick out like a sore thumb. Not in a bad way, it's just noticeable. And with this movie clocking in at 3 hours and 15 minutes, basically the same runtime as the last film, it doesn't quite feel as fast-paced as the last one did, but it sure as hell doesn't feel like 3 hours. I would say it feels like just over 2 hours, which is of course a good thing, but I will say there are certain scenes that you feel the runtime just slightly, but we are spending a lot of time with these characters that we care about, with the Solis, getting to know a little bit more about some of them and just spending time with the rest. I do just wish some of these characters got fleshed out just a little bit more instead of kind of fleshing out the same story arcs that they had from the last movie. But if you care about these characters, if you like the Solis, if you just love the spectacle of these films, of this planet Pandora, you want to get sucked in, immersed, this is definitely going to do that for you. It is absolutely incredible to look at. The visual effects are nothing short of phenomenal. So you have to see this movie on the biggest screen possible, preferably IMAX. It is just such an awesome experience, even though story-wise it is just a little bit frustrating. So overall, I'm gonna give this movie a solid 7.5 out of 10. But as always, I appreciate you guys for watching. My name is Zach. Later.